69–30 BC, Queen of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, best known for her relationship with Roman general Mark Antony and her untimely demise at the age of 39. Cleopatra is often portrayed in popular culture as a tragic figure whose beauty and intelligence were unmatched. But have you ever wondered where she was laid to rest? Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we will look into the possible location of Cleopatra's tomb. The last queen of Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra VII, died in 30 BC after a failed attempt to take over the Egyptian throne with her lover, Mark Antony. After their defeat, she took her own life by allowing an asp, a type of venomous snake, to bite her. Despite being one of the most famous women in history, very little is known about Cleopatra's personal life and even less about her burial place. Because her remains have never been discovered, there are lots of theories as to where she might be buried. The most popular theory is that she is buried next to Antony in a mausoleum in Alexandria, but there is no proof of this. There are also theories that she is buried in the Great Pyramid of Giza or under the Temple of Isis or in a secret tomb in the Siwa Oasis. There is even a popular theory that she is buried in Italy. So what evidence do these theories have to stand on, and how likely is it that her tomb will ever be found? Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, was born in 69 BC and died in 30 BC. Although Cleopatra is often mistakenly considered to be Egyptian, she was actually Greek. The Ptolemaic dynasty was descended from Ptolemy I, who was a general under Alexander the Great. When Alexander died in 323 BC, his generals, the so-called Diadochi, fought a series of wars to divide up his empire. Ptolemy emerged victorious in the eastern Mediterranean and declared himself Pharaoh of Egypt. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt until 30 BC when Cleopatra and her lover, Mark Antony, lost a battle to Octavian, later known as Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra took her own life by allowing an asp to bite her rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome as a captive. Modern scholars question whether this story is true or simply propaganda created by Cleopatra's enemies. Either way, Cleopatra is generally regarded as a tragic heroine in Western culture. Following Cleopatra's death, Octavian annexed Egypt to Rome and it became a province of the Roman Empire. During the following centuries, the Romans built many monumental structures throughout Egypt, such as the Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the ancient world's 7 wonders, but none of them left any trace of Cleopatra's final resting place. Cleopatra's body was never recovered and her tomb has never been discovered. However, people have speculated for centuries where she might be buried, and various theories have emerged over the years. According to Plutarch, Mark Antony and Cleopatra were buried together in a mausoleum in Alexandria. It was built by the famous painter Apelles, who was a contemporary of Antony and Cleopatra and is believed to have painted a famous portrait of Cleopatra. This would make sense as Antony died in battle and Cleopatra chose to take her own life. She may have wanted to be buried with her lover. Also, Alexandria was the capital of Egypt during Cleopatra's reign, and it was the center of trade and culture in the Mediterranean world. It was also the home of the royal family, and it is likely that Cleopatra would have wanted to be buried there. However, despite the fact that the mausoleum is supposed to have been built by one of the greatest artists of the ancient world, it has never been found and there is no archaeological evidence of its existence. Some scholars argue that Plutarch was simply trying to add to the legendary status of Cleopatra and that the two lovers were probably buried separately. If they were buried together, then why hasn't the tomb been found yet? A tomb of this size would need to be quite large to fit both of them and any members of staff that may have died with them. And yet no traces of it have ever been uncovered. A more recent theory suggests that Cleopatra's body was taken to Rome after her death and that she is buried in Italy. This theory is based on the fact that there is a reference in a letter by Roman philosopher Pliny the Younger to a statue of Cleopatra in the Temple of Venus Genetrix on the Palatine Hill in Rome. However, the statue may have been a copy of a Greek original and it is not clear if it was made in Cleopatra's lifetime or after her death. Furthermore, there is no evidence that the statue still exists or that Cleopatra's remains were ever moved to Rome. Perhaps the most controversial theory is that Cleopatra is buried in the Great Pyramid of Giza. This theory is based on the fact that the pyramid was built during the 4th century BC, just a few decades before Cleopatra was born, and it has long been associated with the pharaohs of Egypt. In 1877, British engineer Wayne Dixon published a book in which he claimed that the second chamber of the Great Pyramid actually contained the tombs of Cleopatra and her lover, Mark Antony. He claimed that the Egyptians had hidden the entrance to the chamber using advanced engineering techniques. Despite this, no such chamber has ever been found, and there is no evidence to support Dixon's claims. Another theory is that Cleopatra's tomb is located under the Temple of Isis, which was one of the most important religious sites in the ancient world. The temple was dedicated to the goddess Isis, who was the mother of Horus and wife of Osiris in Egyptian mythology. According to legend, the temple contained the sacred flame of light, which had been kept burning since the founding of the cult of Isis in the 8th century BC. The temple was destroyed by a series of earthquakes between 350 and 365 AD, but excavations in the 20th century revealed the foundations of a much older structure that predated the cult of Isis. Some scholars believe that this structure was actually Cleopatra's tomb, but there is no direct evidence to support this theory. There is also a more modern theory that Cleopatra's tomb was never in Alexandria at all, but that her body was taken to the Siwa oasis in the western desert after her death. According to this theory, Cleopatra planned to hide her body in the Siwa oasis if she were to die in Alexandria. This is because the oasis was home to the temple of the Oracle of Siwa, which was dedicated to the god Amun. According to legend, Alexander the Great had traveled to the oasis to be initiated into the mysteries of Amun and had declared himself the son of the god. Cleopatra may have hoped that by hiding her body in the oasis, she would be able to claim a similar divine status for herself. However, there is no evidence to support this theory either, so what evidence do we have for any of these theories? Unfortunately, not much. Cleopatra's tomb has never been discovered, so all of these theories are purely speculative. Many people believe that her tomb is in the Great Pyramid of Giza, but there is no evidence to support this. We do know that the pyramid was built during the 4th century BC, but it is also possible that it was completed during the reign of Khufu's son, Khafre. Some historians argue that Khafre continued his father E's reign and that he was the pharaoh who commissioned the construction of the Great Sphinx. If this is the case, then it is unlikely that Cleopatra's tomb would be in the Great Pyramid. We also know that the second pyramid, Mycerinus's pyramid, was built during the 27th dynasty. This was the last native Egyptian dynasty, and it ruled over Egypt from around 664 to 332 BC again. This makes it unlikely that Cleopatra's tomb would be in the second pyramid. We can also rule out the possibility that Cleopatra's tomb is in the third pyramid. This is because it was built during the reign of King Amenemhat III and it was not completed until after the reign of Cleopatra. What about the other locations mentioned earlier in the video? Well, we know that Cleopatra died in Alexandria, so it is possible that her tomb could be there. However, there is no evidence to support this theory either. As for the Temple of Isis, we know that it was destroyed by earthquakes in the 4th century AD, so it is unlikely that Cleopatra's tomb would still be standing. The most likely place to find Cleopatra's tomb would be in the Siwa oasis. However, no excavations have ever been carried out there. Perhaps someday soon archaeologists will discover her tomb and we will finally know what happened to the last queen of Egypt. But until that day, the mystery of Cleopatra's tomb will continue.